please interrupt and I'll try and get a little better spot. But thanks everybody for tuning in, and we're going to talk today about school aquaponics and how to overcome some of the challenges of getting an aquaponics greenhouse in a school or a community site. And I have a presentation that I'll put forward and hopefully get all your questions answered, and also certainly glad to have some questions answered at the end. So please jot them down so you don't forget them, and we'll cover some questions at the end, maybe even a little break before the end to get some questions out there for you. So Jay wrapped up who I am. I've been an aquaponics addict for about 6 years now, and it's been a fun road of learning with fellow pioneers in the industry. I've been down the commercial aquaponics road, and now devoting my time here to school grown, which is like homegrown, only school grown. And that's schoolgrown.com or schoolgrown.org. And happy to field any further comments over that way. So I'll go ahead and start the presentation, and we'll get busy. Let me switch right over here. And let's see if this works. All right. So School Grown is a nonprofit company that is dedicated to promoting sustainable agriculture. By no means is it the only thing that we're doing, but it is aquaponics is a key feature of how we accomplish our mission. We're a 501c3 designated nonprofit company. And a little about aquaponics, and we won't go too much because most of the folks here that are logging on here know what aquaponics is. But it's essentially a combination of aquaculture and hydroponic plant production. In aquaculture, which is raising fish in a closed recirculating system, what happens is the fish that are in that container have waste products that build up over time. And the common solution with aquaculture is to dump some of that water and replace it with fresh water, thereby diluting the nutrition that accumulates there in the water. Hydroponics, on the other hand, uses water that's full of nutrition and fertility to grow plants with. So when you tie the two systems together, you have a fertile water source for the hydroponic plant production, and the plants take away nutrition from the system to return purified water back to the fish. And this closed loop system called aquaponics nets in a very rapid and fast and healthy way to grow both fish and plants. It uses about 90% less water than conventional field production, and some studies state even up to 99% less water when looking at the water savings of aquaculture and the veggie production combined. So that's an incredible savings. It's one of the key reasons that we're interested around here in California to do aquaponics, and that same sacredness of water is spreading across the world for various reasons, whether it's water pollution or lack of water, or even areas that just didn't have a lot of water to start with. Aquaponics does not pollute, and this is true because it doesn't dump the water. So the fertility that gets into the water is recycled until it's used up. I have personally had systems over 4 years having never dumped any of the water. I know of systems from online forums that are going over 20 years without ever having dumped any water. And when you don't dump water, not only you're saving water, but you're also saving the fertility and the minerals and so on that are in that water. And that's a big issue too. I'm in Central California, not far from Watsonville, California, where I had a commercial business in aquaponics, and the well water in Watsonville, California, where we were at, came up with 43 to 44 parts per million of nitrate in the well. The EPA says you're not supposed to drink anything over 4 parts per million of nitrate. And this is because it's an agricultural area. When you when farmers irrigate the land, not only are they giving water to the plants, but the water solubilizes all the fertility there and carries it down with the water, which ultimately goes to the wells, the bore. So it's indeed a problem. It's certainly not a problem only to Watsonville. It's a problem for all agricultural areas. Probably the worst part about it is once the nitrates and fertilizers and pesticides hit these aquifers, then they carry with the rivers into the lakes and into the oceans, where they cause even bigger problems. The Mississippi River drains the heartland of fertile America into the Gulf of Mexico, and that increased fertility in the ocean causes something called a dead zone, which is an area that is very fertile, which means it grows algae, algae being a plant. The algae outgrows its typical ecosystem there and ends up depriving itself of oxygen. There's a limit to how much algae can exist, so too much can create this anoxic dead zone. And it's an area of life in the sea that is so anoxic that if a fish swims into it, it dies, and its decaying body only adds to the problem of oxygen demand. So it's very important how and why we do the agriculture that we do. It's important not just to look at the food that's produced, but also the repercussions of the way we produce it. And back to aquaponics, it can be certified organic anywhere. That's because since we're growing without soil, we are limited. We jump through the hoops of typical field-grown organic soil ratings. There's actually some discussion and some arguments among the people that be there about whether organic should apply at all to aquaponics, since there is no soil. I think indeed, or the organic certification was written to quantify soil production. For right now, they're still allowing aquaponics to become organically certified. I think in the future, they may have maybe two categories, one for soil farms, referring to organic, and possibly one for water farms, which have a different set of rules, or should have a different set of rules. At any rate, currently, you can certify an aquaponic farm organic anywhere, meaning you don't have to prove the history of the land, because you are in fact not growing from the land. It allows local food production in more places. You don't have to be in the proximity of great big open vast fields. It creates local jobs in agriculture, and it is truly sustainable agriculture. Aquaponics, not entirely aquaponics alone, but greenhouse production and aquaponics put together, can give you up to 20 times the yield per square foot, and using about 1/20th of the water for each head of lettuce or head of produce that comes out of that item. And those are some good numbers for sure. So at School Grown, we're specializing in something we call the Leaf Aquaponic Greenhouse. And the LEAF is an acronym standing for Living Ecosystem Aquaponic Facility. And it's a 30-foot by 60-foot solar greenhouse. It's got a controlled environment in it. We used raised beds, closed loop aquaponics, and it's a hands-on educational platform for project-based learning. Now, we have multiple motivations for putting this leaf greenhouse out there in schools and communities. One of which is that we feel, and there's many studies to support this, that nutrition is in part a cause for kids having an inability to learn. Whether it's access to nutrition, good nutrition, or simply habit and practice to not choose that nutrition, it helps to have another source of good nutrition so that kids can get the right ingredients in their bodies so that their minds can open up and learn. There's also a sector of children that have a hard time learning from scribbles on a chalkboard. Or even videos or typical means of education. Hands-on learning opens a whole new method of learning ability, and some kids favor that, and all people learn to some extent in a greater detail when they have their hands in it, when they're immersed in it, when they can see and then experience the reaction of what it is they're doing. So outside of agriculture, project-based learning is something schools are striving to push forward. So when we have these leaf greenhouses put in there, it is an actual, tangible, physical thing that kids can feel and touch and see, and get a better or a different or both element to their education. And our tagline is, you know, we already have STEM education in our school systems, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. So we tell the admins in the districts to put a leaf on your stem, and they like that. Let me tell you, administrations love stuff like that. So this 30-foot by 60-foot greenhouse will describe how it's built and how it comes together. But we start with a 4x6 grid that's put on any flat or more or less flat surface. It can go right on top of a parking lot or a concrete pad. It can go on top of an old area of field. When we put it on a slope, then we put pier blocks down and post up so that we start with this level flat grid. On top of the grid, we build raised planters. 4 of them are just a 1 foot thick of water, by which floating rafts are going to go on the top. And then we have 2 that are elevated a little higher, and they have a wicking material in it, something like soil. In fact, you can even use soil if you want. And some organic farmers are used to soil, and they'd prefer to keep the soil in the element, and that's fine. But these 2 beds there that have soil or a soil-like material, they still use the aquaponic water for nutrition and as a way to automatically water the systems. And it lets us open up into growing some things that don't otherwise like to grow in a floating raft with their roots hanging right down there in the water, like carrots and beets and root crops, and the heavier nutrient feeders like cucumbers and tomatoes and berries. So between this system, we have 4 rows of rafts and 2 more of wicking beds, and we'll also have some hanging, but some horizontal pipes that are up overhead growing strawberries. So we have a good variety of produce coming out of the farm. Our new system now actually has 6 4-foot tanks and can hold about 1,000 pounds of fish at any given time. Probably less than that on average, but that's its maximum capacity there. On top of the platform there then and the raised beds, we then build walls and a truss system. We have another method, kind of a version 2 that we're doing as well, where we're doing a hoop greenhouse on top of the bed structure instead of these conventional building techniques with wood and trusses. Both are appropriate for different applications. The reason we went with wood in the first place, because wood's not typically viewed as your best greenhouse material, but we went with wood because it allows a local community lumber yards to sponsor the projects that are going in the schools. It also gives a familiar line of work to many of the parents and volunteers that'll come together to make one of these happen. Steel greenhouse construction is a specialty field. There's just not as many folks doing it. So when we do a wooden greenhouse, in every community, about 1/10 of the people or more are already builders or contractors or familiar with how wooden structures go together. So it helps bring the community involved and helps local sponsors be a part of it. On top of the trusses then, we have a solar material, which I'll cover here in a couple more slides, but we have a solar electric material on the south-facing roof and polycarbonate on the remaining sides. The polycarbonate is a fire-resistant material, which makes the school boards happy because there are restrictions for what materials can be used on a school. And the solar material on the roof then is a glass with a special color laminated to allow photosynthetic light through and captures the rest of light and turning it into electricity. We'll go over that in these following slides, excuse me. So this material is called Solaculture. It's a prototype technology made by a fellow named Glenn Allers in Scotts Valley, Santa Cruz, California area. And we've been a real big advocate of what Glenn and Solaculture have been doing. So it turns out that plants don't need bright white sunlight for photosynthesis. They actually only need a fairly narrow band of blue and another fairly narrow band up in the reds. And this blue and red, when you put them together, is kind of a pink purple color. And that's what plants need for photosynthesis. They don't need the green spectrum in the middle. or the infrared, or the ultraviolet. Those spectrums of light allow many other things in life, but not specifically for photosynthesis. So when you put this material on the roof, it allows those photosynthetic rays to go through, and the other energy of light it converts into electricity. This electricity, by the way, for our greenhouse, equates to about a 5 kilowatt panel for electricity, and the plants themselves see about 97% of photosynthetic light that bright white light has. You might think of it as a shade cloth for the greenhouse, but not for the plants. If you were to put a 50%, by the way, we get 55% with this material. So if you put a 55% shade cloth over the greenhouse, that blocks 55% of the whole spectrum of light, including photosynthesis. So in a warm day in the wintertime, when the hours of daylight are short or the intensity is not as much as you'd like it, you still could have an overheating issue in a greenhouse, which would require shade. But then when you put ordinary shade cloth on, now you've also deprived your plants of some needed energies. This material allows us to effectively shade the greenhouse from heat and allow the plants to think they're in full bright sunlight. There's a panel, one of the prototype panels as well, so you can see the color. And if you can see to the left edge there, that purple pink color is the light that passes through. So from the outside, they kind of look neon orange, and from the inside, they look pink, kind of a purpley pink. And it's a nice, soft, calm color. It's not nearly as bright as what you see in the picture here. Just along the lines of what we're doing here, this isn't necessarily aquaponics, of course, and it's not required for any of the greenhouses, but it's a fun technological element that'll bring kids' attentions in. It supplies us an abundant amount of electricity, and it allows us to justify, if we need to and we want to, it allows us to justify capturing a surplus of electricity for most of the year through the spring and summer and fall in order to use grow lights for the winter time and still have a net zero electrical consumption for the whole year. There we see a picture that's got that material on the greenhouse itself. And you can see it's just a nice soft color. They're still bright inside. Typically, it's only one roof face that gets the material so that the morning sunlight coming in warms up the greenhouse, but then by noon, the pink material shades it so you don't have too much buildup of heat. All right, so moving down the line, our expected yield from one of these leaf greenhouses, we get up to 100 boxes of produce every week, containing 10 to 15 pounds of greens, herbs, cucumbers, carrots, beets, microgreens, mushrooms, and more. We're certainly flexible to what we can grow, and different localities will have a preference for what they'd like to grow, and different seasons will dictate maybe some of the varieties that we are growing. Mushrooms is an interesting one. It has nothing to do with aquaponics at all, but it's another fun thing to put into a system like this and helps kids close the circle on ecosystems. Mushrooms and fungus play a huge part in ecosystems, so it gives us a way to teach them. Mushrooms don't need any light at all, so we put them in trays that are underneath the wicking beds, and mushrooms also produce a bunch of CO2. While the fungus is breaking down the cellulose material, in our case it'll be wood chips and growing shiitake mushrooms and oyster mushrooms, they produce a lot of CO2, and that CO2 is a plant enhancement for our greenhouse because our vegetables like growing even better with elevated levels of CO2. In fact, kind of a little known fact out there in the plant world is that if you give a plant every single thing that it needs, from light and fertility and arable soil, the limiting factor for growth is the presence of CO2 in the air. So when you boost levels of CO2 in a greenhouse, you also boost your potential production. All right, and how we get so much out of a small greenhouse is probably what's next on your minds here. One way we do it is we use a 2 foot by 4 foot floating raft that's a little bit different than the industry standard. Most lettuce rafts or even homemade styrofoam or wooden rafts that folks get and drill holes into, they put the seedlings on an 8-inch center. And the reason why is it takes about 8 inches for a head of lettuce to form. any tighter than that, and you just can't fit a full head of lettuce. They start choking each other out and causing mold issues. So at that, you're only limited to about 2¼ heads per square foot. But early in this business, I noticed that what would happen in reality is when you put a bunch of seedlings in, there's 18 seedlings fit in a typical 2 foot by 4 foot raft. For the first week, you just see rafts and these little seedlings. For the second week, you still see just raft and a little bit bigger seedlings. Finally, at about week 3, you start to see some green out there, and by week 4, it's suddenly over full and you have to harvest. So for 3/4 of that growth, I noticed that a lot of the real estate was wasting sunlight. It wasn't being utilized. Some folks, to fix that, have decided they want to put the holes closer together, and as they grow up, then they'll transplant them farther apart. But now you've added all the work of transplanting, which is not easy, to take a seedling with its roots floating down there in water and take it out of a small hole and put it into another small hole. That adds a lot of labor minutes to each head of lettuce, and let's face it, a head of lettuce is only worth so much, so you can't baby it too much before you've lost your interest in it. So with Clever Ponics rafts, we have now 36 holes, which is too close to plant all 36 at once. But you see in the next slide here, we have a red pattern of 18 holes and another green pattern of 18 holes. If you plant 18 at once, you have what would ordinarily be a typical raft. So there's day 1, and you've planted 18 on the red cycle. And as you can see in this drawing here, there's a lot of wasted real estate. You could plant more, but if you do, they won't have room to grow. So 2 weeks into the growth, and that's according to the season, but it takes most leafy greens about a month from seedling to full size. So 2 weeks, or halfway into the grow, we've got now some bigger items, but still a lot of real estate available. So using a 36-hole raft, now we can plant a second generation of 18 more, and it looks like this. There you see a raft now with 18 2 weeks old and 18 1 day old. Now we're starting to use up some of that real estate. Now from here and evermore, that's as least populated as you'll ever see that raft, because as days go by here, those bigger ones are hitting their growth spurt, and at about day 30, the first 18 are going to be full-sized, and the second generation is going to just get its roots and start getting into that growth pattern. At this point, there's not room for anything to grow there. You can see we got a full grid, but we harvest out the 18 that are ready, which looks like that. And now the second generation of 18 has room to grow, and we immediately plant back with the third generation of 18. And this gives us 36 heads per month per raft, which is 4.5 heads per square foot. Given a little supplemental light and a more or less temperate condition area that the greenhouse is in, we can do a full 12 cycles or so per year. Without supplemental light, we can still get about 8 or 9 cycles per year. So that's pretty impressive yields for sure. And probably the biggest reason is that in aquaponics, those roots are hanging down in the water where the nutrition is available to them. They don't have to go hunt and find nutrition, which allows the plant then to devote the energy that it does get to topside growth instead of root growth. All right, there's day 30 after now the third generation of 18 planting. So that's Clever Ponics rafts. Here's some pictures of it in real life. This was my commercial farm at Veritas, and you can see various ages there in the crop. And we'll move on to the wicking beds. This drawing, by the way, is just showing a couple of fish tanks to show what happens. The water level that is determined in the barrel of gravel, the tank full of gravel, it's determined by the pipe that goes over and connects it to a fish tank or another body of water. Now the two bodies of water are exactly the same level, and that's because water seeks its own level when given a passageway to connect two containers. So by doing this gravel barrel on the tank on the side now is basically a self-watering pot. It's always got a couple inches of water down in the bottom of that, and there's no pump to move it back and forth. The nutrition will pass through the water, through the pipe and through the water and up into the gravel, by osmosis. You have plants pulling out nitrates and fish producing nitrates. You have a flow of nutrition through the water, even if the water itself does not flow. And that's kind of fun. That lets us, in essence, get a pumpless version of aquaponics and more akin to nature. Nature has got some methods of moving materials around as well, but certainly not like a mechanical pump we're used to in typical aquaponic systems. And again, wicking beds allow us to have then soil-like conditions for vegetables, heavy fruiting crops, and root crops. Here is a wicking bed at a school-grown leaf in San Lorenzo Valley High School, California. That's the city of Felton, California. And those are some beet seedlings you see there. Folks ask me what medium we use when we build a wicking bed, and to be honest, it kind of fluctuates according to what materials are available locally for wherever we are. In this case, it's a mixture of some small lava fines and lava rock, and some compost, and some decomposed wood chips, and let me think, there's several items in there. Some biochar is in there, probably a little bit of perlite is in there, and kind of a grab bag of some extra materials we had. Mix it all up, and as long as it feels like loose, nice topsoil that you'd want to plant your garden in, it's also probably okay for a wicking bed. You want to favor on the light and airy side so that it doesn't become waterlogged and mucky. Other than that, it's a fairly flexible thing. On the back edge of this beet bed here, you can see some cucumbers growing up. And on the other side of the aisle, there's tomatoes growing. Actually, right now, we've been about 2 months into it, and we have tomato flowers on every plant, and they're just about reaching the rafters. And it sure is fun to come in every week and see how much has grown since last week. So we end up with a good variety of crops, for sure, and that's important to keep kids interested in it. A lot of folks in aquaponic experience just grow lettuce, and that's because lettuce is very well suited to grow in aquaponics, so it makes sense then to grow it. But we eat more than lettuce, and we want to have that experience for kids, and also the value of the boxes of produce that come out of these things. Here's the same leaf greenhouse there in Felton, California, and you can see, I probably should have put a distinct picture, but you can see in that lower left-hand corner, you can see 2 generations of plants. You see the little red oak leaf that was just planted, and a 2-week-old romaine that's halfway to full size. That's an example of that staggered double crop that gives us 36 heads per raft. And here's another picture of Viridis. By the way, Viridis has 50,000 square feet of these raft beds, producing almost 6,000 heads per day in that area, which is it's a lot of lettuce. And of course, we have root crops, tomatoes, beets, beets and carrots, and also mushrooms will come out of the trays that are underneath the wicking beds. This would be a good time, Jay, if you'd like to throw out a few questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going. But I'll play this little video while Jay throws a few questions my way if you'd like to. This is...
Thanks, John. Do you want me to just throw questions out now, or do you want to describe the video process here?
It's a quick, short one. I'll let it finish and then talk. So that little video right there is there's some drone footage while we were building it. Most of that thing went up in a couple of weekends and then a few days more with some volunteers. And right now we've had, probably 5 or 6 crops of lettuce come out of there. We've already picked our first cucumber. Our first carrots are just a couple weeks away. That was a treat for sure to be. That was our first leaf greenhouse from the ground up. I know aquaponics and I know building, but this was its first true application at a school site, and many more to come. But we sure learned a lot and had a great time with this one. So Jay, if you want to throw me some questions, I think now's a great time.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that so far. Really inspiring work and some inspiring.
Jay, I lost you.
Oh, sorry about that. I was on mute for a second. Yeah, thank you so much. Really inspiring information about the rafts, and it was really cool seeing that greenhouse in person when they're outside of Santa Cruz, I believe. So yeah, we've got some questions here. Let me just field a few right now. Somebody asking about Alex Bryant. In regards to the lettuce, what kind of lettuce is grown in the rafts that are growing and maturing in 4 weeks?
Okay, great question, Alex. So maybe a preface, I know it's winter time and sometimes people have a hard time believing you can grow anything, especially lettuce, in 4 weeks. But we're in sunny Central California. It's not hot outside, but we get some beautiful sunny days most all year long. So we have that going for us here for sure. And currently, we're coming into our winter season. And our winter season, things take more like 6 weeks to grow. So we actually grow heads of lettuce and leafy greens from as little as 3 weeks in the summertime to 6 weeks in the wintertime. It averages for the year at about 4 to 4.5 weeks from seedling to full head. By the way, when we plant our seeds, and we do all of our own planting of seeds right there in the same greenhouse, when we plant our seeds, it takes us about 2 to 4 weeks from seed to seedling, and then another 3 to 6 weeks from seedling to full head. So that totals, about 6 to 8 or even 10 weeks of total time, depending on the season. But the varieties we have right now, just to answer your question, the ones you saw in the picture were a red romaine and a red oak leaf. Those are ones we grow in the summertime. Honestly, the red romaine tends to grow too tall and too fast and gives us trouble on the second generation. So better varieties for us have been Rex lettuce, R-E-X, and also one called Winter Density, which is a bib lettuce. Green and red oak leaf always do wonderful. Salanova is a wonderful blend, although honestly it's too expensive and they're not organic seeds, and we're looking for organic certification. So we don't actually use those right now, though I've used them in the past and they grow really well. I've also had good luck with one called Rhazes, which is spelled R-H-A-Z-E-S. It's a petite, beautifully colored, crispy, wonderful head of lettuce. Another one is Breen, B-R-E-E-N. So we favor varieties that do well in the cooler season, of course, in the wintertime, and then warmer season varieties in the summertime. Rex does well all year round. Oak leaf does well all year round. Let's see, we just switched here in our greenhouse now because it's coming into wintertime, a bib lettuce called Winter Density. I get pelleted seeds, organic if I can, and as soon as we get certification, it'll have to be organic seed only. And I get them from Johnny's, though it's not the only seed source I get. It's just it's a good company and I like dealing with them. So I use Johnny's seeds most of the time. They have a good selection of pelleted seeds. Okay, Jay?
Great, thanks. You want to do a few more? We have a few more kind of technical planting type questions. It might be a good time before we shift. Okay, so let's see. Lisa, I'm asking about, I understand that fish and plants require different pH and minerals. How do you balance those?
Boy, that's a great question. Thank you, Lisa. So as it turns out, the nutrient source for aquaponics doesn't actually come from the fish. It comes from the fish food. So long as the fish food is a balanced variety of plant and animal matter, then you'll end up with a balanced nutrition on the other side of things. So fish don't actually produce any nutrition. They consume nutrition, right? If fish were not there, we'd have to feed the system less. And ironically enough, You wouldn't have to have the fish there at all. You could still keep feeding it fish food or compost or some grass clippings or whatever. At any rate, typically speaking, fish favor higher pHs above 7, and plants favor growing conditions of lower pHs below 7. However, as long as the change is gradual, fish can handle acidic conditions with no problems. In fact, they thrive. They're very healthy. They're hardy, resistance to disease. So it may come as a shock to most of you who've been on online forums and taken classes, but I keep my pH at around 6.0, and honestly, it's down closer to the high 5s more often than not. And I do that because plants are less flexible from growing in high pH environments than fish are to growing in low pH environments. The important thing is that you want a gradual, slow change to that plant ideal. So whatever your system starts out at, aquaponics tends to lower the pH over time, and I just let it do so. And I don't buffer it up until it gets down around 6.0 or so. And then I just add a little bit of calcium carbonate to kind of hold it in from 5.8 to 6.0, and that's what I do for sure. If for some reason the pH is dropping too fast for a calcium carbonate to control, you can always throw a little potassium bicarbonate, which is a little faster dissolving, or calcium or potassium hydroxide. Just be real careful with those because they're pretty powerful. But to answer your question, I keep my pH around 6, and the fish and the plants do wonderfully. Jay? I don't know if I lost Jay or if Jay lost me. Well, I'll give him time to grab some.
Sorry, John, I was on mute again.
That's all right.
You want to do one more question?
Sure, go ahead.
This could be a nice little segue one into, looks like you're about to start talking about some of the business model and how much it costs to build the system you're talking about and how it's funded, all that. But as a segue, a question from Jesus asking about this commercial system. In a commercial aquaponics system, is it better to transplant the plant from one place or container to another, or is it better not to move the crop at all since the beginning to the harvest time? So he's asking what you'd recommend for this process, and as well as an example of how you package these products. And he's planning to grow lettuce as well. He says, "Thank you, great webinar."
All right, thank you, Jesus. So to answer your question very directly, and I kind of have a strong feeling about this because I've done a great deal of it, it makes the most amount of sense with the least amount of headache to plant your seedlings on site. I don't buy my seedlings from somebody else because then you're dependent on their supply chain. I only buy seedlings if I have to cover for something I screwed up. But I plant things on site. I plant my seeds in 1-inch square plugs, which I make from compost and local materials that are organically certifiable. And in fact, I use a seed tray that's sized at a 338, and that means there's 338 cells in each tray. Each tray is 13 by 26 inches long to give you that 1-inch plug. All right. So I plant them there on site in the same greenhouse, in the same environment that everything else is growing, plus a little bit of heat if I need it, or a little bit of light if I need it. That way, when they go from seedling to grow out, there's not an extreme shock in environment. If you have your seedlings in a controlled seedling room off to the side, that's great, except you might have it there at 82 degrees and everything is ideal and perfect. And then when you move them out to your greenhouse that might be warmer or cooler, the plants have to adapt to it. So I prefer to grow my seedlings right in there where I'm going to have them as grow out. And like I said, just a little boost if they need it to get good, healthy seedlings. And then, so I touch the seedling precisely one time after I plant the seed. And that is to bring it from the 338 trays and into the floating rafts. That's the only time I ever touch it. It takes too much time and effort, in my opinion, to transplant them from one hole in a tray and then spread them out into more holes in a tray. I've done it. I've played with it. If you have a lot of very cheap labor, that might be an option for you. But I'm not in the business of promoting very cheap labor. I'm more in the position of having a good design with minimal labor, so that you'd have to have less people to run a system. And that's kind of one of my philosophies there. I'm not looking to make agriculture even cheaper than it was before. I'm looking for it to be a real profession and a real job that pays decent money. And to do that, you can't afford to touch a seedling more than once. All right, Jay, I'm going to jump into some finances then too of the leaf unit, and we'll have some more time for questions. So thank you so much for those questions.
That's definitely one of the big questions too, is how do we actually, how do you do this, as you're saying, for free at no cost to the hosting site?
All right, so I'll get down into that. So Schoolgrown, remember, Schoolgrown's a nonprofit company, so it's not our interest at Schoolgrown to make money. However, that being said, we do teach sustainability, and there's a whole lot of folks out there, and there's a whole lot of nonprofits that use the word sustainable, almost to the point where it's a bad word for some folks because it's misused or overused or used out of context. Well, in my opinion, for a sustainable model to happen, the very first step for sustainability is economic sustainability. So you can talk about all the save the world and save the whales and save the land and save the water and all these other wonderful things and sustainability following every sentence. But if it doesn't make money, it's not sustainable. By definition, if it doesn't support itself financially, then you have to either beg forever for handouts and donations to support something, or it'll fizzle, which isn't a sustainable road for me. So this greenhouse, this leaf greenhouse that we've designed, is designed as an educational platform, first and foremost, that also produces enough to be a farm if that were its purpose. And a farm, remember, is a commercial place that grows food. So our package that we put together is designed so that the proceeds from the fair value of the lettuce and the fruits and vegetables that come off of this thing should pay for its operation and then some. To start off with, let's just all assume that nobody has any money and we'd like to have this at your school. And that's kind of where we're at. So it's not a far stretch to say. The folks that are involved with Schoolgrown right now are a determined and dedicated bunch of people that are willing this to be by a sheer determination. We haven't got any big sponsors. We would love to have some, but it takes time to go chase grants and that sort of thing. And we've chosen so far to put our time to real world practice. And we figure that the money will follow once we get everything dialed in, and we're there right now. So for us to bring this into a school and community site, we do need to have some money. It's not something that we request that the school pay for. It's not taken part of their budget that they already have. We're looking to come in and sponsor a fundraising routine at each place that would like to have a leaf greenhouse. So there's no such thing as a free lunch, but if a bunch of people come in and support a project that will ultimately pay itself back over and over and over and over again, then we can have something at no cost or excessive burden to the powers that need it. So to do that, we need about 75,000. Schoolgrown needs about 75,000 to bring this into a community. And we do this with a threefold fundraising technique, which we're now kind of adopting into just a single crowdfunding effort, whereby the produce itself, if we simply pay it ahead of time, will pay for the whole program. In our area of Central California, CSA is a well-known word. It stands for Community-Supported Agriculture. Not everybody in the US is familiar with the CSA model, and I encourage you to look it up if you're not already familiar with it. But what it is it's a way for a community to help out their local farmer. In the beginning of the year, just like for Schoolgrown, before we've got the site there up, we have some costs that we need to absorb, but we're going to have some product by which to sell or give back to the community, or however that goes. So CSA allows the community to come in and pre-purchase a subscription or a share of a farmer's produce. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we are giving up to 100 boxes of produce into the community, and that produce has value. If we were just to sell out, I think it only takes about 6 or 7 months worth of produce sales alone to pay for all of our necessary startup costs that are there. So that's a lot of produce for folks to buy up ahead of time. So we've given some more abilities for people to come in and participate. So we're looking for about 25,000 just out of pre-orders from the food that's going to come off of this thing called CSA shares. We're also looking, item 2 there, we're looking for about $25,000 of community and business sponsors. Now what this means is, for instance, the local lumber yard in Felton, California is called Scarborough Lumber. And Scarborough was requested that they could help us out with the lumber that we were going to need to build this thing. They were a little unsure, and it was our first one, so they didn't exactly say yes, but they didn't say no either. They said, go ahead and grab some lumber and we'll figure it out later. And for me, that was as good as anything I could have hoped for. So we started getting lumber. Well, at about $13,000 of lumber tab, the owner of the lumber yard came out, and I wasn't there the day he came out. I'm curious to see if he was concerned or upset, or if he just was curious to see where we were at. But either way, he looked at the building that we had put together and the community of volunteers that made it happen, and he was so impressed. He said, hey, you guys just keep it. I'm just going to cancel the tab. And that became for us a powerful tool that allows the community and business sponsors to come in and support one of these things. Lumber yards have that ability, not all of them. I'm not saying they're doing better than any other business, but many of them have the ability to come in and share a little bit on something like that. And Scarborough Lumber in Felton, California certainly did so. And we appreciate it. That was a big part of the cost that we needed. Other sorts of sponsors will want to do the same thing. Granite Rock supplied some gravel for us. Simpson Fasteners supplied some anchors that we used to put these things up. Global Plastic Sheeting in LA gave us a few rolls of liner for free. The local feed store, Mountain Feed Store, has given us some fertilizer products and some ant killer and a number of things there, and some pumps and parts and pieces. So by us needing these items, it also allows those community and business sponsors to come in, and then we recognize them by way of some advertising space on our website, and also on the boxes of produce itself, so that the community that gets the lettuce and goodies also knows the players that made it happen and helped with it. And then the last element we're looking for is a crowdfunding campaign, because not everybody has $10,000 or so to give. They might have $10 to give. So the crowdfunding campaign allows things of smaller nature usually to be supported. So stickers and T-shirts and classes and kits and any number of things we can offer as rewards for people that want to chip in smaller pieces. And when you get all those things put together, that's a pretty wide and stable platform by which School Grown can come into an area that wants it and have these things put together so that it works. And in many ways, by the way, this is a part of a qualifier for us to know that a community is ready for it. If we were to come into an area and nobody wants to buy the produce, then we can't sustain that area. We don't have the capacity as a company yet to come in and offer the charity completely by itself. I think at some point we will, and that certainly will change our documentation then. But for now, we're all working people trying to get this thing off the ground for the good of man. And one of the qualifiers for the site is local support. So if we have a greenhouse that goes up, and we have a community of parents and staff that says, hey, everybody eats food every day. We'd love to buy our food from you. Then that's a great way for them to sponsor the program, and it proves to us that in the long run of things, that produce will get out into student homes, and the value of that produce will keep this whole program going. And that's how we pay for it. By the way, the $75,000 is not a cost. It's barely even the materials and a little labor to put it together. It certainly doesn't touch on long-term maintenance operations or curriculum or support. However, it gets our foot in the door, it gets this things up, and then the produce itself should cover those other things for the long haul. All right? And there's another slide here about CSA produce boxes. And we offer, let's see, right now I think we offer a 4-week $100 package. So you buy a weekly box of produce for 25 bucks a week or 100 bucks a month. And we actually then lowered our quarterly, which is 13 weeks, to $300. So you save about a whole box of produce per quarter if you want to sign up that way. And this is a sign up very much like any other CSA or subscription. You log on and you say, yep, I'll take that for a month and give it a shot. And we put their name on a box. Technically, we're not selling any of these items because we're trying to keep it less formal, I suppose, might be the word. We're actually donating all the goods, but as a reward for a $300 donation, we'll put somebody's name on a box there for 13 weeks. So at the end of the day, it might be considered sales, but for us, it's just a reward for a donation. If you want to donate $100, we put your name on a box, a reservation list there for 4 weeks. And if anything is not reserved, it just goes up for free in front of the school, so the community can come grab a box of produce. They don't have to give anything. They certainly can. You know, we sure appreciate it. We're only working on whatever we get for donations, so we do appreciate it. But if somebody needs a box of produce and they don't have any money to give, then that's precisely who we would want to have given it to anyway. So there's no expectation. There's no person there asking. There's no suggested retail price. There's certainly going to be some folks that come in and say that's a great looking box of produce in January, and I have tomatoes on my plate tonight from within a mile of my home. That's a great deal. I'd love to support that. So that's how that element of our operations running. And these are kind of, next couple slides are a little more detail about the slide that I took too much time on there. But the community sponsors are local businesses that would want to help their community as well as get their name out for some recognition that they helped their community, sort of like an advertising spot. And the crowdfunding site is actually something we're working on right now. We've been debating whether to go with a well-known crowdfunding platform or whether to put one on our website directly. And I think since we're a nonprofit, we can offer a nonprofit tax-deductible donations if we host our own crowdfunding site. And we cannot if we use one of the other sites because they're not nonprofit. So I think as time goes by here, hopefully within the next week or so, we'll have our crowdfunding site up and operational, which will be schoolgrown.com and schoolgrown.org. All right. So now that we know how much money has to be in place for us, and knowing that it's not a requirement or of a school or of a particular donor, but in fact the community can bring this together based on the merits of what it is, what we need, what Schoolgrown needs, is a local champion in order to do the on-site work, some feet on the ground. This champion will mediate between the school board or the community garden. This isn't restricted to schools, but schools are one of our prime targets. So the champion will mediate between the school board and Schoolgrown, organize the documents and motivate the players. In other words, if we take some place in a city where none of us live, none of us that are already in Schoolgrown, it doesn't mean we can't do it there. In fact, we want to do these everywhere across the US and maybe even farther. So I'm in California. If somebody from Washington State wants to have one of these greenhouses in, it's impractical for us to handle the on-the-ground needs up there. So we're wanting someone up there who would like to have this in their local area to be a champion, to be our mediator, to be our point person, where we can say, hey, here's the 4 documents you need to have signed from the board and so on, and here's how to start the campaign, and here's how to share it with all your Facebook friends, and so on. So we're just looking for a local champion who can come together and bring those things together for us. So if any of you listening would like to be champions for your local area, within a week on our website, we'll have a champion packet that'll tell you everything you need to know so that you know what you're getting into when you sign up for this sort of thing. and it'll give you instructions and templates for how to go about do things. We are also going to have a champion training class in Central California in late January. And I apologize, I had anticipated having a date for you all listening, but late January and here within the next few days, we'll pick those out. We're trying to solidify the venue before we give you the date. And it'll be a class here where champions from all over the nation can come and learn precisely what they need and to get their specific questions answered and to get a little practice of how to talk to a local sponsor and how to contact their appropriate school board members, what we need to do for permits and power and water and utilities, and how to make a little video that wraps it all up and makes it a local event. So there's a champion training workshop that School Grown will be hosting here in late January, and so stay tuned for that. Okay, so what School Grown needs next is that local champion and some bright young minds and a place to put up some more of these leaf greenhouses. We're looking for support and help on every level. If what we do is appealing to you as a career move, we're certainly looking for those sort of people. If you would like to volunteer and learn more about it, we have weekly volunteer days in the Central California area. And we definitely are starting a list of schools that are needing this to go out there and get it done. After we do the champion training program, we'll also do a builder's training program where you'll be able to come and build one of these things and take it apart in a weekend or a week maybe. That's very important so that we can actually get this thing to expand like it needs to. And we'll also have a leaf operations training program so that whoever stays on the site and is going to handle the regular operations, which is a paid staff position for School Grown, will get the education they need and qualified to do that. So at this time, I'd like to say thanks to everybody, and for sure, if there's more questions to be answered, I'm happy to answer, and Jay will keep track of our time and tell us when to wrap it up.
Great, thank you so much, Jon. It's such an inspiring model. It's like this perfect hybrid between nonprofit, education, community-supported agriculture, and a viable business model too. It's really inspiring work that you're doing, and I hope that there's many champions that you find to be able to spread this work around the country. So we definitely have some time for questions, so we can keep the conversation going, and we can go as long as until 3:30 is our absolute cutoff. So let's just keep the conversation going. I can just kind of give some more questions here. And I want to mention your websites too again, schoolgrown.com or .org, also Fishnet Aquaponics, you haven't talked about too much, but that's another one of your sites. Also, livingmandala.com, we do commercial aquaponics with applied permaculture trainings. Jon is one of the lead instructors there, also Rob Nash from Austin Aquaponics and Max Myers of NorCal Aquaponics. These are fantastic courses where you can really learn a lot more of the nuts and bolts of building these systems. So a couple more questions. Speaking of those trainings, I'm curious what you think about this one, Jon. Someone asked, actually toward the beginning, he was asking about, are we going to get any PDF plans or something that can help us build the greenhouse? What are the best ways to build greenhouses in really hot climate? So I guess a two-part question. And I would say it sounds like you maybe already answered that with come to the champion training.
Yeah, so that's a great question too. At some point, we probably will release all of our plans and documentation, but we're still making sure it's ready to release. So we're still refining that program. It's the reason that we started with one specific site there in Felton that's easy for us to get. We have 2, perhaps 3 more that we're currently building right now, and that'll probably roll into about a dozen, and then we'll release some more documentation. We just hate to, if you let things go out too premature before everything's tried and tested, and every single time we do something right now, we find a shortcut that's really important. And before we let the dogs loose, we're trying to get a real clean program to let the dogs loose too. So certainly the education part of it will be satisfied. The champion training package that we're putting together through School Grown is not going to tell you how to build a greenhouse or how to operate aquaponics. It's going to tell you how to be a champion to get one of these things at your local schools. And the reason why is it's just too much information to put into a weekend to do everything else. The training that I do there with Jay and Living Mandala is a 4-day commercial course, and it's a non-stop feed of information, and we do our best to limit it to 4 days. So the champion course itself is just going to help people go home and then get one of these in their local area. Chances are, by the way, that person who is going to come to that is going to be a teacher or a parent or a community member that would like to see this there. And then on top of that, now we're going to have to train some builders to the local area. And on top of that, we're going to have to train some operators, and they won't be the same people. So we chose to break up our class into some more manageable chunks that are specialized information for those folks, and not overwhelm everybody with a month-long class that nobody could afford to take a month and go do at one shot. So that's part of the reason there. But yes, forthcoming will be plans. We're a nonprofit. We want to spread sustainable agriculture, but we also want these things to be successful. And for us to guarantee that, we still need to do a little bit of time and documentation before we let it out to the public for exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it. By the way, I skipped over, and I probably should discuss now, the whole overall program that School Grown comes into a school site is we lease the land from the school. How exactly we're doing these greenhouses has been a bit of an evolution according to trying to get to our original end goal and finding no's or problems or obstacles, and then we figure out the right questions to ask in order to not have those obstacles. So school administrations, as you may imagine, are not the quickest things to navigate through. A school administrator's got an awful lot of things to do, and a school garden usually is not at the top of their list. By the way, historically speaking, there's a lot of school gardens out there of one form or another. There's even a lot of school greenhouses out there. And they generally, which is by no means to say they're not successful or wonderful in their own, but they generally fall into some form of disrepair and become a burden for the maintenance man to pull the weeds out of it because nobody's paying attention to it. So when you go into the administration and you say, hey, I want to build this greenhouse, they think of the last time they had a greenhouse built or the last school garden that came in and how it's still been a burden for them after 12 years of pulling weeds around it. So they're not anxious to say yes, typically speaking. We have tried to formulate our program to have that commercial and financial aspect and reward behind it, as well as some technological pull and appeal, so that it's not just farming or pulling weeds. It's the opposite of that. It's all the fun without the work. And not say there's no work, but it's a lot of fun, and there's a draw that brings aquaponics into people. And I know how to do aquaponics successfully. So the other thing that happens, and I have this conversation an awful lot, I have folks that come in and say, we've already had aquaponics at our school. In fact, I recently just read that there's over 1,300 aquaponics systems in schools in the US already. Over 1,300 that are already in schools. And virtually all of them are troublesome to some extent because they come in from zealous parents, which is good, but they don't fully understand the science behind things, and the design is based on what they thought they knew instead of what they should have known. So what we're trying to do is come in with a working, successful model that is an inspiration for new designs and new performance, but also carries its own weight on a financial model by the fact that it's a farm itself. So how's that?
Sounds great. Yeah, long answer to a short question, but really it's a big question. I could just say a few things about it as well as far as the design element goes. The course that Jon mentioned, the commercial aquaponics training that we do 4 times a year, and the one is just coming up in Sacramento now, November 12th, so in about less than a week. We we do give people, well, both Max Myers, NorCal Aquaponics has a nearly 100-page detailed course manual that has some specific design schematics in it. And also Rob Nash from Austin Aquaponics very generously gives away some designs for his smaller AP300 backyard system, as well as a larger system. And really, you know, it's our approach in this course. It really depends. There's so many. It's not as cookie cutter is our approach to it, because there's so many different needs and possibilities of what people might want, you know, from a real cheap, you know, backyard system with recycled materials and bathtubs to, say, the scale of the large 8 acres of commercial greenhouses that Jon was running. There's really so many possibilities. And what we try to teach people is what are the different components and how does it work, and what are the ratios, and what do you need to think about what you would do, and then kind of learning all the tips and tricks from people that have a lot of experience in the field. So that's more our approach to the commercial aquaponics training, as well as including some specific designs that you could do. So I encourage people who really want to dive into this field to take our training, or there's others too. Jon does trainings, and there's others around the world too. I think ours is a really unique, awesome approach to one. So a couple other questions in that genre that we were just talking about with system designs and things like that. Let's see, somebody asking, Jason was asking about, what do you think is an ideal startup size system to learn from and test the commercial potential? I was thinking something modular, perhaps a 2-barrel bed and fish tank, and then upgrade with a sump tank and then vertical towers. So, Jon, do you want to speak to that? The ideal startup size to learn from and test commercial potential?
I apologize. I lost you for just a second there. I apologize. So, could you repeat the question?
Sure. Jason was asking about what do you think is the ideal startup size system to test commercial potential?
All right, that's a good question. So, and just to give it a preface here, I wear more than one hat. So most of this webinar has been around School Grown, which is a nonprofit purpose. So I try to avoid the commercial type questions that are outside the realm of our nonprofit. However, I know commercial very well as also, which is the hat that I wear when I go to Jay's class with NorCal Aquaponics and Rob Nash, Austin Aquaponics, is my commercial experience. So to answer your question, Jason, to become a commercial farmer, there's a whole lot of questions you need to ask yourself ahead of time. Rob Nash is a great guy, and I learned so much from him. And he taught me a phrase early on in my ventures here with aquaponics and commercial farming. And he said, aquaponic farmers don't get paid to grow plants. And I thought, that's kind of crazy, because that's what I'm here trying to do, is get paid to grow plants. He says aquaponic farmers get paid to sell plants. And that's a huge differentiation. It's not maybe what you'd think. Gardening is a fun hobby that a lot of people enjoy. Farming is a career path that not a lot of people are successful at. So examine some questions there, first of all. As far as size, in order to determine scale, I would probably go out there with something in the neighborhood of 1,000 square feet, and that will give you the answers you're looking at to go up or down. There's a lot of opinions among commercial aquaponics farmers, and to be successful in commercial aquaponics, you have to examine not how good of a farmer you are or how many plants you can grow. You have to look at how many plants you can sell and what sells for the most amount of money versus effort put forward. So examine your local area. I can't tell you what your area is going to supply and what it's going to support. I can say that I'm about 5 blocks from a farmer's market, and my wife runs a farmer's market booth there where she sells mustard and jams and that sort of thing, and she does really, really good. She does great. Farmers, though, we're in Central California, and there's a lot of farmers. So farmers actually struggle to make their daily bill, let alone make a profit. And that's because we're in an area where people can farm all year long. So, and farming is a big commercial industry here. So if you live in a place where there are fewer farmers, that's an advantage for commercial aquaponics farming, because you can go to your backyard. You don't have to devote a terrible amount of space to it because it's very efficient. And if you can fetch a good dollar in your local market, then that's a good thing for you. But those are site-specific questions. It's not going to be the same answer for everyone. So start off with 1,000 square foot or so. There's different styles and different designs for lettuce. I can tell you that for the total greenhouse space, I do about 3 heads of lettuce per square foot per month. All right, and that's kind of a maximum, but it's possible. And that's so if you were to start with a 1,000 square foot greenhouse, I could grow in a 1,000 square foot greenhouse a net of about 3,000 heads of lettuce per month. Now, if you're getting 50 cents a head, that's not a living for me. It's not enough to entice me to become a farmer. But if you're getting $2 a head, it's getting closer. If you were to get $3 a head, that's $9,000 a month, and that's something that's totally doable. But the question is, can you get $3 a head? I know Rob Nash, he sells his heads of lettuce at farmers. I think he does 2 farmers markets and a few restaurant clients. But his farmers markets, he does $3 a head or 2 for $5. And almost everybody that comes through buys 2 heads of lettuce, and he does very, very well. But he's well known. His market knows him. He's willing to spend his Saturdays at a market. Not everybody is. So answer those questions. 1,000 square foot will give you the answer you need. I'm also going to tell you something else. Don't go over 5,000 square foot unless you want to become a true, genuine farmer and you're willing to go over 100,000 square feet. Because once you go over 5,000 square feet, you're going to sell past your capacity for a local, know your farmer, pay top dollar, direct sale. And when you break over that boutique scale, now you're competing with every other farmer in the world. And now you have to physically have enough volume to get out there. So if you're making a penny per head, you're okay. And that's a big no man's land. So above 5,000 square foot and less than 100,000 square feet is a difficult place to land. And I would guess probably 95% of potential aquaponic farmers aim for a target that's above 5 and less than 100,000 square feet. And it's no surprise that success is a rare thing among this new type of industry.
Thanks, John. Real detailed information there as far as commercial aspect. That really makes all the more sense to the model that you're doing now, having gone away from commercial and really incorporating the education. And then what are the values that can be incorporated with that? Perhaps monetary, or perhaps just the community values and the learning and the community building, all of it that it creates. So let's switch back a little bit with another question pertaining back to the school grown model. This is a question from Bruce, again about scale. So Bruce is saying, our high school is only 130 students, and this size production would be too large for our needs. Can you discuss how it could be scaled down in the ratios of biomedia beds to floating rafts to deal with fish solids, etc.? So any thoughts on that, John? Scaling down for smaller towns and smaller high schools?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the question, Bruce. That was a big element that I didn't cover today. So thank you so much for bringing that up too. It works. The aquaponics work. The leaf greenhouse works. The whole overall concepts work definitely, going down below the size of our 1,800 square feet. What doesn't work is the ability for us, meaning School Grown as a nonprofit company, to come in and have that operational support and management for less than 1,800 square feet. Does that make sense? So if your personal mission is to spend a day a week or so at your local high school, then you can go down to whatever size you want to do it. Just a tabletop is still a reasonable return for the amount of effort you do. But School Grown is handling all the operations of this program we're doing, from curriculum to organizing interns to the management and staying on top of pests and placing the boxes and taking the donations, and there's a whole infrastructure behind what we're trying to do. And we can't afford to do that for a little tabletop system or something that's in between, you know, up to that 1,800 square foot. So the reason we came up with this 30-foot by 60-foot greenhouse is we figured that most all schools, and we understand that we're going to exclude some really small schools, but most small schools can still sell or still have need for 100 boxes of produce a week. And we don't have to sell out to make things work. If we had 50 sales, 50 shares per week, we could still make our numbers work for continued maintenance and operation. So to answer your question, for school grown, it's a tough area for us to get into something smaller because it's not worth the time it takes a paid person to come manage it. On a backyard or hobby level or a classroom project sort of thing where the mission is not to pay for it, but it's simply by demonstration, then there is no minimum boundary. I've seen systems that are only 1 square foot be quite functional for aquaponics. The other thing is you might be surprised what your school of 130 students can come up with. This is not, it's not limited. The food goes out to the community. We would like it to go into the parents' homes of the children so that the children get the nutrition, but it's also going to go into the staff that works at the school and the neighborhoods surrounding the area. So if you live in an area where there's less than 50 homes, then that's probably too small for us to come in. But chances are there's several thousand in your area, and we're only looking to place 50 boxes a week, or 100, you know, at least 50. But someplace in that zone, there's before you say no, that's too large for your community, maybe send out a survey to your community that said, hey, would you, as a family, purchase a $25 weekly box of produce, and see where that goes. You might be surprised. Jay?
Thanks, John. Well, we have time for a few more, I suppose.
Sure.
How about, this is another kind of change of topic from Nancy Love, talking about aquaponics and being a vegan. So Nancy says, I eat a plant-based diet, but as a master gardener have become aware of the significant savings of water by using aquaponics. I want to promote it and hopefully do it myself at some point. I have been told by a fellow master gardener who has an aquaponics greenhouse that you do not have to harvest the fish. Is this true? And if so, what do those of us who do not want to kill animals or kill the fish, and when the fish become too old to be useful in the system, what do we do with the fish? So thoughts about that, John?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So thank you so much. So here's the truth of it, and we kind of touched on it on a comment earlier. The fish don't supply any nutrition to the system. The fish actually consume nutrition. That means that the system will work without fish at all. To technically be called aquaponics, it needs to have the aquaculture. But to use another commonly used term, there's something called bioponics. And that's where you still have the nutritional input of organic matter. And you see you have now, instead of fish being a part of the equation, you have a bacterial and microinvertebrates and other critters that live in and around aquatic and terrestrial environments that do that decomposition work for you. Okay, so you do not have to have fish for a bioponic system to work. You also do not have to harvest fish if you choose to have them but not eat them. And this is, I try not to make judgment calls for other people. If you feel that having or containing fish is a violation of what you feel is right and wrong, then just leave the fish out. Other folks will have no problem. Some folks that don't want to eat fish, but or have fish or contain fish, they don't mind crustaceans. So they have crawdads or shrimp in systems, which is certainly possible as well. Or some folks who don't eat fish still enjoy looking and seeing fish, and they can go with a decorative species or even one that's destined for the aquarium trade. So whatever your preference, there's a lot of flexibility with the system that we do. The exact same system, literally detail for detail, will work without fish. and you can just throw compost into it, and it becomes basically an aquatic compost pile that waters your system and your plants and takes out the solids and the whole bit. So we don't need fish. It's just that I personally like fish, and a lot of kids around here like fish, and I like to see them. I like the husbandry part of it, and it's something I enjoy, but by no means is it required. I know I'm working with UCSC on a project, and UCSC, which is the California University there at Santa Cruz, they have a policy on campus to not have anything in captivity with a face, and that includes a fish. So by their policy, their campus policy, you can't have an aquaponics system there because fish have faces and we couldn't keep them captive. So in order to comply with their regulations, we discussed a program that would use crawdads. So we'll see where that goes. But there's a lot of flexibility in the world, and I'm not making judgment calls for anybody else any more than I'd want them to make them for me. So it works without the fish.
Thanks, Jon. So I guess you're implying then that fishes do have faces, but crawdads do not.
Well, that's generally agreed by the face discussing experts that are out there.
Yeah, nice.
I'm not one of them.
Mm-hmm. And no, I would just add to that, Nancy, that there's also an approach you could take. You could be, the fish that you're raising, not for eating, but you could be raising, say, fish that are endangered, to be breeding them, to be repopulating native species and things like that. And then really, at least from my understanding, I know a lot less than Jon. He probably has some specific numbers, but really you have exponentially more green yields than you do fish yields in most systems. Aquaponics mostly is growing the plants by far more than the fish. And there's certainly other ways that you can approach it to not have to eat the fish. You could also be just letting them live their lives and returning them into compost piles or into other elements of your system. So anyway, well, I think we're about at our time. Jon, do you have anything to add to that one, or you want to have any last words?
That's a pretty good wrap for what we're trying to cover today. I thought I'd also list, and I should have written it on the slide, but I was going to list my email is JP, just the letter JP as in Jon Parr, jp@schoolgrown.com. If any questions didn't get answered, or if you have any interest that you can't find on the website, just go ahead and shoot me an email. I get a lot of emails, so I kind of go through in bursts of activity there. So if you don't hear from me for a little bit, it doesn't mean I didn't see it. It just means I haven't seen it yet. And whatever you do, don't call me. I hardly even answer that thing anymore. So text is best, or email is good. And please feel free to ask questions or give ideas or tell us what we're missing. And I talk a lot of aquaponics, so I'm happy to do that.
Great, thank you so much, Jon. I know you're a really busy guy on the ground with all these projects, so thank you so much for taking the time to be with us for this webinar. I want to again mention people for more information. Jon's website, schoolgrown.com and .org, and everyone will also get a follow-up email that will include this information and the recording to this webinar. Also, if you want to check out our trainings, we do 4 commercial aquaponics trainings with applied permaculture per year. Jon is one of the instructors, along with Max Myers of NorCal Aquaponics and Rob Nash of Austin Aquaponics. We have one, our last one of 2015 is coming up here in just a week in Sacramento. And look ahead for more of those courses. Our 2016 calendar should be coming out fairly soon as well. And you can find that at livingmandala.com/aquaponics. So thank you again, everyone. We didn't get to all the questions, but highly encourage people to come take a training or come go volunteer at one of Jon's days if you want some on-the-ground experience and are in California, or hopefully as more school-grown projects pop up around the country, and there may be a plethora of opportunity for volunteer work. I hope and visualize that happening for you guys, Jon. It's an awesome project. Thanks so much for spearheading it and taking your time with us today.
Hey, thank you, Jay. And thank you, everybody who tuned in.
All right, thanks. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
We're signing off.